remember, remember.
It's a journey that we'll never forget.
Remember not to forget. Let us remember, remember. Let us remember to remember. May we remember, remember. May we remember not to forget. Let us remember, remember. May we remember the dismembered. Let us remember, remember. Remember not to forget. Not to forget. Not to forget.
It's a journey that we'll never forget.
Yes, I remember to remember, not to forget the great Mekatilili wa Menza.
It's a journey that we'll never forget.
She, the queen from Giriamaland, she who was stolen in 1914, taken from Malindi all the way to Gusii. Queen Mekatilili wa Menza, she broke out of prison and walked back more than 800 kilometers to continue with the liberation of our people. It's a journey that I'll never forget. I remember
It's a journey
not to forget.
we'll never forget.
King, remember Koitalel Arap Samoei, Kenyan king.
It's a journey that we'll never forget.
From the Nandi Hills, he resisted against the colonial invasion.
It's a journey that we'll never forget.
Koitalel Arap Samoei, they shot him right in the heart, in the heart, in the heart, in the heart.
It's a journey that we'll never forget.
Remember, remember. Washera niwe nyina wa Ashera. Ati mushera ndasheraga nongi. Eni ungi uri utari kihariro. Na ati aikagia irigo ritho, irigo rigakahuka mukahu. Eni irigo riria icuhu ni guciara ni kuririmira wega. Njeri ni mwenjeri kihoto kioneke miri wega. Njiarwa irenda kugera njira gatagati imuinagira. Njirira njira njarie njega njarie kihoto ndihote hotane. Cerera nyakairo na kinandu kia irathimo. Na nikirorerwa anake mainamiriire wira mamuona no kuinamuka. Muhiriga wake uguthukaga. Avonjerito But the biggest weapon wielded and actually daily unleashed by imperialism against the collective defiance is the cultural bomb. The effect of a cultural bomb is to annihilate a people's belief in their names, in their languages, in their environment, in their heritage of struggle, in their unity, in their capacities, and ultimately in themselves. It makes them see their past as one wasteland of non-achievement, and it makes them want to distance themselves from that wasteland. It makes them want to identify with that which is farthest removed from themselves. For instance, with other people's languages rather than their own. It makes them identify with that which is decadent and reactionary. All those forces which would stop their own springs of life. It even plants serious doubts about the moral rightness of struggle, possibilities of triumph or victory are seen as remote, ridiculous dreams. The intended results are despair, despondency, and a collective death wish. Amidst this wasteland, which it has created, imperialism presents itself as the cure and demands that the dependent sings rhymes and hymns of praise with the constant refrain, "Theft is holy." Indeed, This refrain sums up the new creed of neo-colonial bourgeois in many independent African states. The classes fighting against imperialism, even in its own neo-colonial stage and form, have to confront this threat with the higher and more creative culture of resolute struggle. These classes have to wield even more firmly the weapons of the struggle contained in their cultures. They have to speak the united language of struggle contained in each of their languages. They must discover their various tongues to sing the song, "A people united shall never be defeated." The theme of this book is simple. It is taken from a poem by the Guyanese poet Martin Carter, in which he sees ordinary men and women hungering and living in rooms without lights. All those men and women in South Africa, Namibia, Kenya, Zaire, Ivory Coast, El Salvador, Chile, Philippines, South Korea, Indonesia, Grenada, Fanons wretched of the earth, who have declared loud and clear that they do not sleep to dream, but dream to change the world. I hope that some of these issues in this book will find echoes in your hearts.
For non-Gikuyu speakers, I'll just say what Giduku was reading just then was an extract of one of the latest books from our special guest tonight called Keda Moyoru. And it was basically explaining the different names, the clans and the matriarchy, and yeah, how the Gikuyu community kind of started. So we'll be giving pointers to what people could do in terms of looking out for these books that are out there, and the significance also, as I said, of acknowledging the matriarchs in the African communities. The second one was one of the most famous books, Decolonizing Our Mind, which we'll be delving into and explaining a little bit more about where that came from. And it's a great evening, and I'm really pleased to see the messages floating around, people saying hello from everywhere. And we have Mwalimu Ngũgĩ wa Thiongo with us, which is, yeah, we're going to have an interesting evening. So just also to acknowledge, I know we've had technical issues, but we've also just to acknowledge the team that's working behind the scenes, that the ones that are not as visible. So we've got Laura and Sai and Sharon and Will, and also we've got speakers who will be joining us later on, Giduku himself, and also Dr. Christine Kahigi as well. I also want to just say Eid Mubarak to our friends and family and comrades, as today we know they're celebrating. In fact, some of our team members couldn't join us because of that reason, but also at this moment really acknowledge what's going on in Palestine as well. Yeah, and before I introduce our guest, I just thought it'd be good to tell you a little bit about the Racial Justice Network and why we're here and why we chose this evening, just to kind of land with that, because I imagine some of you are perhaps booked on for the first time and are not necessarily aware about who we are and what we do. So Penny and Penina Wangari Jones. It's so funny because we've been talking about this and we've spoken about names as well, and here I am doing Penny. But also I acknowledge Penina is a Christian name, and it was only a few years ago I asked my grandma where that name came from, because the names as in the Gikuyu communities are passed on. You're named after your grandparents. And she said when she was being Christianized, she was asked to pick a name, and she looked and saw Penina and she thought, I like that one. And that's how obviously Penina came about, but the name Wangari is the one that obviously has more significance. And I've had the pleasure of understanding what Wangari means from our conversations with, and reading the book Kedamoyoru in terms of the meaning of the name and what that does. So I'm Penina, as I said, and I'm the director of the Racial Justice Network. I also, just as a pointer, because this is also connected to some of the work that I'm doing, I'm currently undertaking my PhD at Manchester University, looking at how coloniality shapes Black activism. But coming back to the Racial Justice Network, it's a Black-led anti-racist charity based in the north of England. And by north of England, we're based in Leeds and Bradford, which, as you know, one of Professor Ngugi's home turf or study turf was in Leeds University. We seek holistic economic, cultural, and spiritual repairs to end racial injustice and address legacies of colonialism. And to do this, we've centered the most marginalized, work predominantly with Black and Brown communities of racially minoritized communities, but by looking at how race intersects or links with other oppressions and identities. And so the core of our work is around training, mobilizing, organizing, advocacy, more recently putting more around reports, which again, people who are familiar might have seen a lot more of our reports that are coming out recently. And we have a range of projects, quite a lot, and I thought I wouldn't necessarily get into all of them, but again, as it was kind of, I saw the messages flying on earlier, saying to people to look in, like, you know, if you kind of follow the social media handles that we've got, you might also be able to look into the website and see other work that we do as well, just to kind of have a bit of a taster. But the ones that really that are holding and maybe part of this evening's evening to us in the UK. I know it's morning in California and in 8 o'clock in Kenya. Yeah, through the course of it, you can look through and see some of the projects. But the reason why we were holding this evening, the two projects that this conversation sits right in the middle of, is Internationalism and Collective Conversations. And Collective Conversations as a project was an attempt, at least an attempt, but our refusal or to allow diversity to colonize race and racism, and the difficulty that people have around race, racism and racialism, understanding or talking about it. So we wanted to create spaces that we can bring these conversations that bring in the colonial race lens, that because as we know, where we are now, that history of the enslavement of our people and colonialism really sits center in terms of how global relations interact. Again, we'll be talking about that later on. So the Collective Conversations as a project was for us creating spaces where we can bring these conversations for people to learn and share and grow together and take action as a result. And the one on internationalism was predominantly around really recognizing that there is no way we can do racism, racialism within borders. So we need to link and hold hands and also stand in solidarity with and learn from our brothers and sisters in the global south, or what others call majority world. And for me, as a person who was born and bred in Kenya and I've spent half of my life in the UK, I really kind of this definitely speaks truth to it. And this evening, I'd say the journey for this evening started following an invite to Nairobi University in 2019 to talk about education and quality education. What is quality education? And where we were invited as a Racial Justice Network, and we were really asking people, what do we call quality? And the whole idea of alluding or kind of almost the holding or the access around whiteness, but also what we consider universal, how that sits in, and how kind of that goes back and forth. And then following on that, several months later, was a trip that we had, a few of us from the Racial Justice Network, but again, in partnership with activists, Gikuyu and others in Kenya, that went to and spent a week there talking about decolonizing education. And a lot of all of that we were doing, we had Professor Ngugi in our minds, because we know this journey for him at least started 50 years ago, or these questions that we were posing now. So, and then since then, clearly the projects have the links have continued, the relationships have continued, and not just in Kenya, it's in other parts. So acknowledging internationalism as a way forward, as we're pushing back on all of the other structural oppressions that we are existing in right now, was the introduction to Professor Ngugi, and I've had the real pleasure and honor of spending evenings, long conversations with him, and learning a lot, the wisdom, but also really appreciating and a lot of gratitude for that time and generosity as well of that wisdom. And he felt that it's been really good for me to sit and almost sit at the steps and learn and engage. And we thought it'd be good if we could have this conversation and invite the public to join us. And this is kind of where we are. So the reason for this evening is kind of sat in three spaces of the US, Kenya or Africa, and UK. And now, as I said, I'm really pleased to see how many people have connected with us. So that is kind of a little bit about, not a little bit, about the Racial Justice Network. And I'm sure I'll kind of reflect more as we try and make this space as informal as possible, as decolonial as possible, because we really also didn't want it to be like very formal and strict with it. So we wanted to kind of bring in a bit of storytelling, oral histories, but also allow for people to interact, which is why we're saying if you can't necessarily interact with us directly here, definitely interact with us on social media. So that said, I will now invite Mwalimu Ngũgĩ wa Thiongo and to kind of begin this journey and answer some of the questions that we had, and some conversations that we've had privately, and I'm sure perhaps held in many other places. And I didn't think he needs much of you need much of an introduction, because I'm sure people who've joined have seen and recognized your work. But for the sake of people who haven't, and maybe actually it'd be good for you to share a little bit more as you tell the journeys, because we'll be asking questions around the books and why, you know, what was going on at the time. So it'd be good also to add elements that I leave out, Professor Ngũgĩ wa Thiongo. And so yeah, so just a small bit of being here. I just want to welcome you and say thank you so much for giving us your time and being here. You probably tell the story why we started a little bit late because of timings, but I'll leave that to you. And really, just maybe to begin with, I know you heard the bit that Gikuyu read from the book. About loss of languages, culture, the association, and maybe you could begin with us on that as you kind of give us a little bit more of I know you're in California, you're a professor at the university, and yeah, a little bit more. Welcome. I just realized I'm going on longer than I intended because we started late. So over to you, Professor Ngũgĩ wa Thiongo.
I was very moved by Giku's reading, and in his readings, actually his selections, what he read summarizes very well, you know, my own thinking. I think he read the mind, Eda Muyuru, or of the Perfect Nine, an epic that I wrote in Gikuyu. It's called Keda Muyuru in Gikuyu. And I remember when I came to launch it in Kenya about a year ago, Luke and I did go to various places to read, or he read, and he was so powerful. Every time he read, everybody wanted a copy of the book. And in Moranga, women were following him, asking him, please read my, I want to know about my clan. I want to know about my clan. Yeah. So it was, yeah. So it was very wonderful to hear you again. And you and Gary, we have been, you are quite right. You and I have been talking a lot on the phone about this event, and other, matters. Yeah, yeah. And I thought this was going to be, I still hope it's going to be question and answer, so I can respond to whatever questions you might have. If I summarize from my books, there are so many that I don't know which to start with. But decolonize the mind, I might as well start with decolonizing the mind briefly, and how it came to be, yeah, because it tells my story, yeah, Now, the decolonizing the mind, I want to take you back to 1977. I was then professor and chair of the Department of Literature at Nairobi University. And some of us started talking about theater to the people. This was important because we used to have problems with the national theater, yeah. So we started asking ourselves, but really, where is national theater? National theater resides among the people. Theater is from the people. That's where you get real national theater. Where people are, that's where theater is. Yeah. In short, that's how we started Kameredo Community Education Cultural Center, which is, Kameredo is a village which is about 30 kilometers from Nairobi. And there we produce a play in the language spoken by the community in that area, because you can't have theater of the people to the people and so on. You have to use the language. You can't go there and start theater in English or French or Portuguese, you have to use the language people use. And in Kameredo, it was Gikuyu, right? The play in Gikuyu was called Gai Kadeda, in English, I'll marry when I want. It was very popular. Yeah. People used to come, hire buses from different parts of the country just to come and see ordinary men and women. And by ordinary men and women, I mean factory workers, plantation workers, landless, peasants. Instead of Kenya government appreciating what we had done, the play was stopped on 11th November 1977. I remember. And on midnight of December that 1st, armed police in their vehicles with those blue and red lights literally came to my house in Lemuru, where I then lived. I used to work in Nairobi, but lived in the village. And I was picked at midnight. So that January 1978, I was in a maximum security prison in Committee. It was during my prison days, so to speak, that I started asking myself, why should an African government put me in a maximum security prison for writing and performing a play in my mother tongue in Kenya? The reason why I asked that question is because I had written other books like Petals of Blood in English, or with Michelle Mogo, the play, The Trial of Dedan Kimathi, and they were equally, if not more critical of the post-colonial condition. And I was not put in a maximum security prison. Yeah. But now this play performed by workers, factory workers and plantation workers in the village was stopped, and I am in a maximum security prison. So that's really what started me really. I thought about languages before and so on, but really, this really made me start thinking about the language question in Africa. I'll tell you what I thought about that. But those thoughts which I had in prison at Committee for a whole year in 78, were the ones which became the basis of my book, Decolonizing the Mind. Decolonizing the Mind came about because I was invited. I was then in exile in London, and I was invited by University of Auckland in New Zealand to give special lectures. They're called Rob lectures in honor of their founding chancellor of the university, right? They're what they call learned lectures. You just go there and give the lecture. There are 4 of them. You give them over a period of 2 weeks. Yeah. And that's how I came to give these lectures on the politics of language in African literature. That was the overall title, later published under the title Decolonizing the Mind. And I want to tell you very briefly what happened. The first day of my lecture, the hall was packed, but mostly with faculty and students of the University of Auckland, generally white community. Second lecture, I started seeing people from the town, and from the Maori people started streaming in, because the word of mouth was advertising what some had heard, okay? By that lecture, it was virtually 3/4 Maori people and other Pacific peoples. By the 4th lecture, now the place was packed with Pacific peoples. And I remember an incident when it came to the question and answer, when one Maori person from the audience, he went and took the microphone from the professor who was conducting the proceedings, and he said, "These are our lectures." So the Maori person started conducting question and answer, right? In other words, Maori people took over the hall, okay? And eventually when I was leaving, a girl brought me a gourd, a Maori lady, young person, and she told me, "You don't even have to know my name. One, reference to Maori or Pacific peoples. My reference were all to my African and Kenyan experience. But the lectures rang a bell. Yeah. So this is what I'm thinking about the language question. As I'm seeing it, it's more than just an African European phenomenon. It is a colonial problem. And I want to just briefly say this. Whenever any people colonize another people anywhere in the world, the first thing they do is impose their language on the colonized. They impose their language on the colonized. Not only do they impose their language on the colonized, they make the colonized despise their own languages. So it's not a question of knowing a new language. It's a question of being made humiliated relative to your own language and getting glory relative to the colonizer's language. So you come to associate intelligence, power, something else, or with, say, English in our case, in the case of Kenya, or French, or Portuguese can be anywhere, right? And you can't have a negative attitude towards your own languages, and you don't know why. You just do it. You know, if someone speaks in English, you can see, oh, wow, intelligence, oh, wonderful. They speak in their mother tongue, oh, and you know, oh, why? This guy, has he been to England, as he's telling us, right? Yeah, you know, or, you know, and you can try this. A person comes and says, I'm very learned. I know Italian, I know English, I know Italian, I know French, I know maybe Russian, you know, and people say, oh, wow, right, with the eyes open, okay? Another person comes and says, I also know many languages. I know Luo, I know Maasai, I know Yoruba, Igbo, Zulu, Kikamba. And they will say, oh, but why? In other words, you talk about the African languages, you know, they'll be wondering, why are you wasting time learning so many languages? But with French and Italian, they are wowed by that. Okay. All that's a part of the conditioning. It has nothing to do with languages where they are or this, you know, is the conditioning that makes us feel negative towards our, yeah. And I want to give you one example, two very quickly. You can ask, we can talk about it a bit more, and I've written about it in some of my books anyway. But let me just give you an example. And I want to go to an European country, Ireland. You know, Ireland is part of, or not the whole of Ireland, at least Northern Ireland was part of Greek. And Ireland was colonized by the English, put that way. Yeah. In fact, some English settled in Ireland, you know. But the English from about 1366 could not quite conquer the Irish, you know, they were trying different ways to subdue the Irish. And they passed many laws, you know, prohibiting English settlers from learning or speaking Irish. or prohibit Irish people from speaking Irish in the near the plantation owned or by the English, okay. But still they could not. And then this, in 1596, a very prominent English poet, a contemporary of Shakespeare, called Spencer, wrote a book, A View of Ireland at the Present Time. This book is a conversation between an English settler in Ireland and a visiting lord from London. And they are discussing how come we have not been able to subdue the Irish. And in the book, it is suggested that the most effective way of conquering the Irish is one, get at their names, their naming system, how they call themselves. If you can make them forget to call themselves Mark so-and-so or O so-and-so, they will soon forget who they are. Yes, their memory. The other was language, right? English, right? So those two, the naming system and language, were the suggested means of making the Irish forget who they were, erase their memory, okay, of who they were. That's one example. But let me also tell you something else a little bit. Among the settlers, among the Spencer, although a poet, he was also a settler in Ireland, meaning he was given a farm, like Kenyan, like Europeans used to have large plantations in Kenya or in Zimbabwe, although they were still in England, some of them, okay? The same thing, yeah. And among his neighbors was one called Walter Raleigh, who was later founding Englishman. No, and I know those who have been to America, that African language that were banned for the enslaved Africans from the continent. African languages were banned in the plantation. They could not speak their African languages, and those who spoke, some of them were hanged in both the Caribbean and the plantations. But note, for European settlers, their linguistic connection to Europe was never disconnected. But for African people, it was. Let me give you a third example. Two more, and then I'll be done. Native Americans, okay. In 1823, a certain Captain Pratt, his name, started a school called Carla, it's still there in Pennsylvania, which means they brought Native American students to come. It's a kind of dormitory, what in Kenya we call dormitory, dorm school, residential school. They stay there. And the first thing, when they arrived, they found marks on the blackboard. And were given a stick to point out. You point at any mark on the blackboard. It would happen that the mark you pointed happened to be an English name, right? The name you pointed at, without knowing it's a name, just a mark, just touch anything on the blackboard, that piece of paper was written on a piece of cloth and it was tied sewn on the back of your shirt or whatever cloth you're wearing, and that became your name, your English name. Okay. Again, they went through the same thing, their language being despised, being honored. Yeah. So the same thing, and I can give you more examples, happening among Maori people. Huh? They tell of how some of them were beaten on their butts until blood came out when they were caught speaking Maori in the school compound. Right? The same thing happened in Kenya, right? Those of my generation, anyway, I don't know about the current generation, so my generation know how many times we were beaten on our butts, punishment, corporal punishment for speaking our mother tongues in the school compound. That's being shaming a kid, a child, for speaking their mother tongue. And praising him or her glory when he spoke very good English. It was like, ah, oh, very good, you know. And the others were king, right? All were made, how did they get to know the people who did those things, like speaking their mother tongue? A monitor, a monitor or something else, a piece of something would be given to the first student, and then he is to pass it on to whoever was speaking Gikuyu or in African language. And in the evening, then you know all the people who had spoken their mother tongues in the compound and were punished. Yeah. What you look at that history, and it's all over. I can give you more examples. It's the same pattern everywhere. You know, associate negativity, humiliation, pain to African languages or to colonized languages, and associate glory and achievement to English and French. You know, so you bring about what is called conditioning. Condition works like this, very roughly, in a psychology, you know. If you want to train a dog, you punish him or her when they do something you don't, the undesired behavior. And when they do a good thing, which you give them a biscuit or something, or meat or something, you know. So for desired, undesired behavior, you punish the dog. After some time, the dog begins to automatically avoid the thing for which he is being punished, and becomes now very efficient in what he is being praised, given food for. Okay, it's the same pattern of conditioning. You know, Pavlov did experiments in which a dog was given food at a particular hour when a bell was rung. Later, even without food, if a bell was rung at about that time, the dog would salivate, even if there's no food. But that's also what happens to us in terms of languages. We salivate when you hear the sounds of English and French, okay? And when the sound of an African language, you feel pain, unless you're using the language as a joke. You know, when people want to make clever jokes, they'll do it in their mother tongue, and then they laugh, you know. But when it won't become serious now, it's English or French or Portuguese, you know. What I'm trying to say, these things are as a result of, it's calculated. It happened in every settler colony in the world, okay? So what then happened after independence, we succumbed to that, right? Remember, it was the Kenyan new government, the independent Kenyan government, which abolished the teaching of African language, even in primary school, first 2 years, right? So we account to it, we think abnormality has been normalized as normal, all right? And we built policies, education policies. We built, other policies on the basis of English. We put a lot of money into English. Zero money on African languages, right? So decolonize the mind, really, in a way. I'm so to summarize what language is very, very important. I would say our names as well, quite frankly. And I want to say one thing I've seen in Kenya, for instance, among ladies, some of them were very educated, very wonderful people, and wonderful. And I'm not saying anything negative about that, but when they write their names in terms of achievements, right? And I've seen this, they write Margaret. Let's say one is called Jerry. They write Margaret N. dot for Jerry, and then whatever is their last name, whether it's husband's name or father's name. You see, an African woman's name becomes trapped, literally, trapped, becomes a dot, trapped between colony and patriarchy. Okay, because the woman had become a dot. She may be the professors of anything, she may be, whatever in engineering, whatever women have achieved and so on. But instead of their name becoming an example of what they put a dot to their name and they leave out the English. And so just a small example, but connect this with language as well. Yeah. So decolonize the mind is really, about this, about the mind, because the mind, you want to think about in a society, you think about economic aspects of society, political aspects of society, cultural aspects, and psychological aspects. And colonization, as we know it, is economic. It is political, that's taking political power. It's cultural, and it's psychological as well. So when people think of decolonization, they have to think about all those levels of decolonization, economic, political, cultural. But no matter how we look at it, languages are a very important part of the entire decolonization process. And by the way, that's why after my prison days, or even during committee, I decided to start writing in Gikuyu, my mother tongue, okay? And as you know, since then, I have since 1978, I've written all my novels in Gikuyu, all my poetry is in Gikuyu, and all my drama is in Gikuyu. But that has not prevented from my books being accessible in other languages. They've been translated into Swahili, they've been translated into English, into French, into Russian, into many languages in the world, right? So writing in Gikuyu has not prevented my books from being accessible. And the last one, which I wrote in Gikuyu, Kedamoyiru, the one from which Geduk read, Kedamoyiru, which was later translated into English as it's Perfect Nine. It's the same book, Perfect Nine. And as you know, Perfect Nine was recently long listed for the International Book Prize, the first time an African language book in translation has been so listed, right? It can be done, but only we, say in the case of Africa, African people, but in the case of other people in Asia and America, Australia, for them to remember, only we who can do something about our languages. But knowing our languages does not prevent us from adding knowledge of other languages, right? There's no reason why every Kenyan should not know their mother tongue, then Kiswahili, then English, and any other language, or know your mother tongue and one or more of other African languages in Kenya, then Kiswahili, then English, then French, then Portuguese, then Mandarin, and so on. Right? So for me then, decolonization means, in the end, systems that allow us to be confident in ourselves, that we don't only have to look for validation from the West, right? We can do things, we can do amazing things, but we can learn from the West and East and everywhere else, right? Learning from others is a good thing, but you learn, you add to what you already have, to what you add to the knowledge you already have, you add other knowledges, and that's good, right? But we've been trained that if we abandon our languages, we don't know and know more about other people, or especially Europe, then we are more modern. We are not modern. We are simply enslaved. So let me finish with a sentence which I always use because it sums up everything for me. If you know all the languages of the world and you don't know your mother tongue or the language of your culture, that is enslavement. Yeah. But if you know your mother tongue or the language of your culture and add to it all the languages of the world, that is empowerment. Yeah. And for me, decolonization means collective empowerment, in our case, of the African people.
Thank you so much for that. I think you've answered almost 4 questions that I had listed. And I'm glad because it also means we can move on to other sections. But I think just to reiterate some of those points, because I remember, we've had that conversation about women being trapped between the empire, colony, and patriarchy. But I also remember well in school, having, I think they used to call the monto or monzo, and you'd hang it on your neck because you've been caught speaking the language and the embarrassment that went with that. So I definitely know I don't know about current and now, and I'm aware that I've seen people kind of signing in saying that they've been Korogosho and wherever else. So I wonder whether it's still happening. But I was also struck by something you said, that because it's not just about the language, it's also what the language carries, which is our culture and our traditions and our ways of doing things. I know when we've spoken, I've shared about epistemicide, which is also the death or the genocide of knowledge systems, whether it's native or the indigenous communities, which has been taken away. And some of the points I took down was around how the erection of a new language was almost and a new culture was at the cost or death of others. And what you're saying time and time again is very much around that, that the association of, humiliation, the shame and the pain, physical pain that people endured in school, meant that they've detached from. And what I find funny is, obviously I speak Gikuyu and have done because both my grandparents, well, one of my grandparents in terms of literacy, being illiterate. So the language of communication was Gikuyu, and that was fine. So I've learned it. But when I go to visit, or when I'm back in Kenya, the surprise of the fact I can still speak Gikuyu, and it's like, oh, how do you speak it now? And it's almost, the expectation is when you go, you forget. And the fact that you've retained it is and I feel like there's been a bit of pride in knowing and reading your work, also not just about the language and the culture, around really retaining. And what I'm hearing time and time again is, you're not saying let's not learn new, you're saying learn new, but you need to retain yours. There's something I read that you were speaking about this, about how the colonizer or the oppressor came, the tactic that they used was something about killing the native and saving the man or the woman. Mm-hmm. And in this case, producing a class of people. So I think there was a statement, it might have been somebody who's read it, where he said, Indian in color, but English in taste, opinions, moral, and intellect. And what we've seen continuously is that.
We just one was Captain Pratt, who said, kill the one who started Carlisle School. He said he did that to kill the Indian and save the man. You can Google that one there, you know. The other one was Macaulay in India in 1834. They were coming with a new education, for recommending a new education program for India. And India has a long history of written literature, you know, through Sanskrit, okay? But they wanted to replace Sanskrit and Indian languages and replace it with English. And they said, the reason why they wanted, his name is Macaulay, and you can get it, you can Google minutes on Indian education, minutes, like in minutes, okay? And he said, they are doing this, they want to introduce English because they want to create a class of Indians in name, in religion, in clothes, in everything, but with an English mind, right? That policy was more or less same applied everywhere else, including Kenya. And for those who come from Kenya, just go to 1952 and see what was banned in 1952 in Kenya. All African-run schools that were using also African languages were banned. All African language newspapers, magazines were banned. Writers who wrote in African languages, like Akarawa Ajao and Stanley Kagea, were imprisoned for 10 years maximum, you know, in detention camps. Others, like editors of African newspapers, like Womenyeri, were exiled in London. This was in 1952. That's when there was a definite change in language policy in Kenya, and English became now the really systematically applied as the language of the new educated class. Yeah.
Thank you. And yeah, I think the point there was, the question I had further on was, so, you know, the former colonies fought for self-rule and gained independence, but what did they really gain? And I think what you've just been explaining there is some of that. Obviously, we're focusing on education, but the people who sat in power, again, there's another quote that you really like to share, and you shared with me several times with CLR James, about who takes over usually is. So so there's kind of questions that you've answered that I feel like could allow us to do and play a short video, again, that tells this a little bit of the story that you've shared a little bit just now, and then we'll come back to more questions, and where I'll be able to invite now, yeah, I'll do that when we've played the video.
I returned to Kenya from Leeds University, England, in 1967. and became a member of the English department at the University of Nairobi. Within a year, I had joined 2 other colleagues, not in the department, to write a document that called for its abolition. The reaction was swift and intense. Meetings were held at all levels of the university, from the Department of the Faculty Board of Arts, the Senate, and beyond the corridors of the university, to the press, and even to Parliament. We had spoken the unspeakable, almost as if we had called for the end of the world. Over time, we were accused of many crimes. We wanted Shakespeare abolished and replaced by Caribbean, African American, Asian, and Latin American Marxists, including the most Marxist writers of all, V.S. Naipaul and Ralph Ellison. The debate and the consequences went beyond Nairobi to other universities in Africa and beyond, generating disputes. Some of the earliest shots in what later became post-colonial theories. Why should the continued existence or not of an English department have generated so much fury and theory? I want to revisit the document called On the Abolition of the English Department, by way of teasing out the ideological, epistemological, and pedagogical issues of the dispute and their impact on my life and work in practice and theory.
That was yeah, we'll delve into that one in a minute. And I think what I was saying earlier was some of what you've spoken about, the journey and the warning shots that you did like 50 years ago, were the beginnings where we started that conversation. So in this section, I'm also going to invite Gikuyu to contribute, and also, and I struggle with this one because she likes to tell me to refer to her by her professional name instead of calling her my mother when we're in public spaces. But Dr. Christine Muthoni Kahigi, who's a lecturer at the University of Nairobi on sociology, but she was a history teacher. And I'd say a lot of what I do now perhaps stems back from that, because a lot of the history that we learned, not just our family history of resistance and history around, including about yourself, Mwalimu Ngugi wa Thiongo, was from my parents and from her. But we've had challenges and we've asked questions like, why did we not learn this stuff? What I was learning from home is not what I was learning in school. So I'll invite you, Dr. Christine Kahigi, to respond to this question around how do you think what we were left with? So obviously or clearly, Professor Ngugi started something and you've joined the university much later on. But what we have now is a continuation, or the examples that have been given as well of languages and not being taught in school. What do you think we were left with and or we continue with now in terms of understanding coloniality or colonial legacies? If you can unmute your mic.
Okay, thank you, Penny. And I feel so humbled to be engaged in such a conversation with such a great man, whom I heard about after, in fact, the time he was undergoing through those troubles, I was in Form 5, 1977. And I had done Professor Ngugi's book, The River Between, as one of my set books in Form 4. I loved literature. In fact, I had hoped to continue with literature and history, but I was told there are too many others who did not have an option because you needed 3 subjects in A-level. I had the 3, done very well. I wanted literature and history, but I was given literature and geography. So this is a great day for me, coming face to face in the most effective way under the circumstances, because I feel like I'm in the same room with him. And thank you so much for your contribution. Now, I was a history teacher for 23 years, both in O levels and A levels, before the A levels were kicked out and we adopted just O levels. And history and literature are closely related. And most of what Professor went through, they were together with the history lecturers. Akina Maina wa Kenyatta was my lecturer, and others. So they're very related. And even right from what he has told me, because I feel like removing my name on the screen right now, because he has really challenged me, especially about the names. And I know during the years that I taught, I used to question the content of what we are teaching, but I was teaching during Moi's era, when you had to be very careful what you said. When we adopted Neo philosophy, a philosophy that even the teachers never understood. And in history, and I used to challenge that a lot. And I think this is where Penina got interested, because what she would learn, I would maybe undo it in the evening or when the schools closed. Then during the colonial, when we came to cover the colonial period, we would talk about the development during the colonial period. And we know, and we are aware that most of the content we taught was written by foreigners, not our people. And unfortunately, the first African writers later, except the brave ones like Professor Ngũgĩ, would simply reproduce what they were taught. So when we would have a curriculum that covers about David Livingstone, about Speke and Barton, and I would be teaching that. And when it came to African societies, yes, we would talk about those who resisted, but in passing. And my heart felt that we really required to talk more about people like Mwatu Angoma, the one who led the Kamba resistance during the days of the Imperial British East Africa Company. But we rarely mentioned those. We would go to how the resistance, those who resisted were crushed by the superior power of the colonialists, and how we told the line. Then when we came to A-level history, the syllabus used to offer history, 2 areas, African history and European history. And I still remember African history would talk about those Akina Shaka the Zulu, how they were defeated. Mostly the emphasis was how they were defeated. Then come to Rhodesia, because my days were talking about Rhodesia. And we would talk about Cecil Rhodes all the way from South Africa, coming to Rhodesia and dreaming to go to Cairo, to take the whole of Africa up to Cairo. The emphasis was still there. And I remember when I went to teach a national school, you know, because before then, of course, you teach, there is less challenge and a few questions at the lower level. But during the A levels, when you concentrated on just 3 subjects, we are expected to cover more. And this is where I would reveal content that I was not supposed to. And most students would ask me, but Mwalimu, why are we not taught this? A-levels, you know, national schools was after A-level. When I went to a national school, it was after A-levels were over. And when I went to teach history, you know, in national schools, we have students from all over, Luo, Luya, Kamba, Kisi, and we know ourselves by certain, you know, labels we are given. And they would come fearful. For example, I was in a national school in Central Province, and the other communities, especially from Western, would be fearful of coming and living among the Kikuyus. There were the labels. But when we taught the actual history that happened, of course, outside of the syllabus, and I really finished my, my syllabus anyway, but my students passed very well, because what I thought was for them to think rather than to memorize, and they would find it interesting. And I remember they were asking, but we have been told Kikuyus killed, Kikuyus steal, or Kambas are witch doctors and what have you. And these were labels that were, you know, developed during the colonial days as they applied the policy of divide and rule. Unfortunately, after independence, our politicians have been using the same to keep us divided and never seeing ourselves as a nation. So that they now keep blaming us about instability and the tribal clashes, whereas in their country it is the ethnic clashes, they're not tribal, because they know the connotation of the term tribe. And I think because of the content that was being taught, history kept losing students when it was made a choice or an option, because what was given was not relevant and was not meeting the needs of the students who are teaching. So where am I going into all this? I'm simply saying, now for the period that I taught history, the role of women was undermined. And I feel we missed a whole generation of changing this by professor being out in America, because we have very few men who advocate for matriarchy rather than patriarchy. Now, so that when we talk of the role of women, especially through nationalism and the fight for independence, we are regarded as rebels. And you are all aware that most women who have come out and actually take those labels, Akina Wangari Maathai, Akina Karoa, they are labeled as rebels, divorcees who can never keep husbands. And I feel like we would have advanced a little bit ahead if we still had Professor Thiongo here, because the kind of discussion we are holding now shows that if many of us, especially from this end, had had it, things might have been better. But still, we are not late, because we still have RJN that is fighting for decolonization and racial justice. And we are hoping that once we continue with our conversation, that is the collective conversation, we shall come up with a way forward. Then when we still look at what goes on, I'm still on history. We really have resources to help us write what we now know and avoid what was recorded by those who had went through the same system and are reproducing what they were taught, because that is another area that we are very weak. I know how I struggled when I was teaching history, because we talk about names in our own country. And we talk about areas that have colonial names. Think of the names like Dagoretti, where we had our alliance, Kikuyu. The names that are used there are the corruption of the English names that they gave to those areas when they came and settled. What did we do? We adopted them. Yes, we pronounce them in funny ways, but we have forgotten what they were originally. So if we try to ask what the Goto was, maybe we have to go to those very old parents now who can tell us what they were calling that area. Go to Dagoretti Corner. Go to wherever, so many places that we name today, even as we teach history and the region and where the churches, the first churches were opened, the first administration posed by our civilizers, they are all English names. We have lost the original names that they used to be known by. I will not even talk about our own names when we felt so proud when we got an English name, because right now I'm thinking twice about it. Then what about even the places where our nationalists suffered so much when they fought for our independence? We've been talking about mapping those areas. Kagobiri Gaos, it is a cemetery for former freedom fighters. That is where the torture chambers of the people who were about to be released were. But what do we know about them? Nothing. We still refer to them by the name that the Mzungu was using, and we really know history about it. That is just one. I think I saw another one in Githuguri and the rest. And all this is in our history and our language. And this is why I said I can see the history and the connection between history and language. So how about mapping these places where our freedom fighters passed? Then my other concern, how often do we learn about those who did not meet the standards of the colonialists when they handed us independence? We study about Jomo Kenyatta fine. We study about Daniel Arap Moi, and we teach, but we leave the history of the Akina Kagea, Akina Kemathi, those ones we mentioned in passing. And this is very hard. In fact, if I go back to what gave me an interest in history, when I was in primary school, I belonged to a team of traditional dancers, the best one in Kenya at that time, 1968 to 1969. The team was known as Kinyereria. Professor may have heard about Kinyereria. Those are the days when we used to go to Gatondo. And what are some of the songs I sang in primary 4? And I think I'll sing of one, and you understand why even when we teach history and when we call people to unite and be one, we still cannot. I can remember this song, which I didn't know the meaning. Gwero hikia kerego oi eya Kenyatta na baba ne moru na maito ne moru orietare njike atia nderutaga igongona muruke ndaigua wa mubuo kihituka. Those who were there at that time know we were singing against a particular ethnic group at that time for political reasons. And that was the time that we went to drink tea at Kenyatta's. When we were taken to drink tea, even as primary school kids, I knew that was not the place because I used to go to Kenyatta's place every other day. Then the other song that also makes me wonder why we cannot sing for others was Inywa Kararia Kenyatta. Inywa Kararia Kenyatta motoragia ke mwaheirwo githurimo ria githithino ya Kenyatta mukiria kiinie Ngai twaguthaitha Ngai thathaia baba oi twaguthaitha rathima bururi witu na thamaki aitu. Now it was him who fought for independence and the others, you get the meaning. I wish I had more time. Then the whole thing, we are not supposed to talk about it, but I do know. And I'm not talking about the nationalist oathing because that one was positive and that one was calling for the Kikuyu, I mean the Kenyan people to come together and fight the colonialists. I'm talking about the oathing of 1969. Most of you who are old enough can tell, where even the young children were taken, including me. And some of the vows were made to take were that we shall never marry from those other communities. And there were derogatory words that we were using, which we really knew the meaning, but we were wanted never to talk about it. So what am I bringing all this? Now, if we have to decolonize, it will have to start from the small ones. And then those of us who have gone deeper, because Racial Justice Network has opened my eyes. It has enabled me to dig deeper, especially after I carried that data collection for Penina's work, going to talk to people who were actually involved in the Mau Mau War, Akina Field Marshal Modoni. The things I had, I feel it is time we wrote the real history in the real language, and we know what even those others that are not supportive of today's regime, what they said, for us to let us be our own judges. Let us learn the history of all. Let us learn the history of Jaramogi Oginga Odinga, Kagea, Kimathi. Let us learn about Ngugi wa Thiongo, especially when he's alive. Let us learn about Mazurui, Professor. Let's hear what they said in our history and hear less about Speke and Barton, about Livingstone, about civilization of Kenya, and we are going to get somewhere. I don't know whether I've said what I wanted, but because I'm also conscious of it, I do know that we have so much to do, especially now when we are holding this collective conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. I should have warned that we are, I think, in the midst of historians, we're in the midst of storytellers, we're in the midst of the four of us. I know we speak a lot, and I'm trying to keep an eye on the time and move the conversation, but it's also really deep and meaningful. So hopefully people can bear with us. I've seen questions that have come in anyway, so I'm going to try and summarize the questions maybe in the last 10 minutes, but I would like to invite Gikuyu I think the team are joking that we have the colonial times that we use when we're holding some of our events, because it's harder to restrict and hear and allow for all this depth and meaning. So I'm going to invite Gikuyu. I know we've seen you several times today on the video, and thanks again for that, all of it. But I also remember when we met, both times when we met in 2019 and 2020, we spoken about the history and what we were taught, which I know, again, I struggle with saying, Dr. Kaigi, what Ma'am was just mentioning now. What's your take on what Professor Ngugi has been saying about the loss, about what we were left with, and what, again, Ma'am is talking about in terms of the departures of our own history? If you can unmute your mic.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you. I don't want to take a lot of time, but because first and foremost, I've been here. I was at the beginning, nikarudi tena. I was there again with reading, trying or acting or pretending to be Ngugi, reading his thoughts, which was very, very powerful, even when I was recording it earlier. But what I can say briefly is that, getting to know oneself is not easy. And the lack that, the biggest lack that I would say personally I've had is of getting to know Professor Ngugi and getting to know other revolutionaries and people who have stood out to speak about the independence of the mind. In school, I went to Vizaosho Primary School. In standard 1, 2, and 3, what would happen is that you leave school at about 3:20 in the afternoon. And what would happen for me in my experience was that the fellow Indian students would be left learning Gujarati, and I would be free to go and play and everything. And it hit me at one point, like, why are they learning Gujarati? I'm not being taught Gujarati or my language.
So the best thing that I could do as a young boy was to go and get my mother's Bible, which was in Gikuyu, and start reading so that I learn Gikuyu. So in my innocence, I got to learn Gikuyu by myself, not taught by anybody, but through the feeling that why am I being left out? The others are learning Gujarati, and I am being left just to learn English. So in the mix of all these, I know my Bible very well, but the best that I got out of it is the language, is Gikuyu. Fast forward, when we came to the struggles of the Second Liberation in '92 at the Freedom Corner, it is at this place that I interacted so much with the language of the struggle. The language of the struggle was the language that people were speaking. People would come and speak in their own languages. And the mothers of political prisoners, definitely we could not communicate to them in English or in Swahili. And so we started learning and discussing and talking about language. What language can we communicate with the people we are pushing, which is the struggles for the release of political prisoners. And that is where we read a lot, shared books about Ngugi, about Maina wa Kenyate. We got inspirations from people like Wile Mutunga and other people, and saying and understanding, we got to understand that you really don't have to have the English, which we call the English of the nose, who is speaking with the nose, you know, with the accent, and feeling that once you do that, then you know more than anybody else. The struggles that have happened since then, and especially at that time, for me, was that art is one of the things that we can use and is a tool that is so powerful in pushing the struggle. And this tool does not choose any language. You can choose any language to speak truth to power. So some of the songs that we learned at the Freedom Corner were taught by old women, you know, the mothers of Merogi Karaoke, the mothers of people like Koigi wa Mwere, and these old women were singing and teaching us songs that were sung during the days of the struggle by the Mau Mau. I remember a joke or a very beautiful story that is told about Shaka Zulu. And the story of Shaka Zulu is interesting because it was translated and he was told, or rather, after saying that we are not going to give up our struggle in South Africa, the people were threatened and told that, you know, if you don't accept Christianity and English, then you'll burn in hell. And the fire will be very big. And so Shaka Zulu retorted and said, around here, we eat fire. And I think that is the thing, you know, if we are able to communicate, if we are able to understand ourselves, if we are able to be clear in ourselves of what the struggle is, the language does not matter. It does. We cannot liberate.
Can't hear sound.
I think, Vuku, I think you've muted by accident or something like that.
You're mute.
To be and to go, the language does not matter. English does not matter, or any other language does not matter. Your language is what, the language of the heart and the mind and your tongue is what matters. So I wouldn't want to talk so much because I've been around and I've already communicated, but I think it is important for us to teach the current generation, especially, that it is okay. It is okay to sing in your language, like one Kwame Reggae is doing right now in Kenya, singing and communicating in Gikuyu. What one Harry Kimani is doing, singing and communicating in his language. What one we know is doing, singing in the Luo and communicating. So we don't have to be embarrassed of our languages. We don't have to be small. We don't have to smallize ourselves when it comes to speaking and communicating in our languages. I think it has to be clear, and I think it's only professor who can be able to do this, to separate the fact that tribalism is different from identity of language. When politicians want to divide us, and when they do, because they're still doing it and working hard on that, we have to understand that they normally don't divide us in our languages. They do it in English. They do it in foreign languages, because it is just about them, you know? So language is an important thing all over the world, from wherever people come from, because this is the only place that one can feel confident and comfortable to communicate what is deep in the heart. So I think the current generation is who we have to focus. The current and the future generation is who we need to focus on more than even the damage that has happened in the past. But thank you so much for having me. And thank you to Ngũgĩ, for Professor Ngũgĩ, for being the guide who, among others, have helped some of us to understand that it is okay to be who you are and to be proud of who you are and to communicate towards the future, the struggle towards the future. Asante.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Kibuku. And yeah, all of those things that you said, I'm compelled because I know obviously the next part was going to come back to you, Professor Ngugi, and I've also tried to summarize some of the questions that are coming in because I'm aware of the time, but I know we can't do it. It feels like we need another hour, but maybe we can, some of us who have capacity can stay on a little bit, but then those who need to definitely go can go. So I've tried to summarize some of the questions in also so you can respond to this piece that we asked what were we left with. But and I don't know, kana nikara mukuoya nigetha wandike nako nigetha hote gucokia ciuria ciothe oria nguria kimwe kimwe. I don't know how we'll do it. And yeah, for people who asked for translations, there was an idea that definitely we will not say everything in English, and the tech people, if they catch it quick enough, they can translate at the bottom in terms of what we're saying. But one of the things I remember clearly speaking about was something that when we've been speaking about education, which meant that the tying down and the fact that the language should equip and give us skills as opposed to disempowering us. And that's something, and I was also reflecting back on this joke that you made, and obviously we carried it on for a while around when you're writing your book when you're in prison and you were writing in Kikuyu, and what I think the example you gave was Shaitani okaga ehubete nguo cia githungu agakuria orahieka niki because English is a language that you're very familiar with, and here you are struggling or trying to write in Gikuyu, and you said that you are fighting ukahurana nako. So I'm interested to hear a little bit more about that, but then also some questions now, because I can throw the questions in, was, is there anything that is lost in translation? Because we understand, obviously, the books you've written have been in Gikuyu and then you've translated them. So there was a question about that. The second question is around whether revolution walks hand in hand with recentering what colonization took from colonized people, creating new epistemologies, and also is there a sense of revenge even for the way other languages have taken on English. So I think maybe somebody was talking about around, for example, Pidgin English or Creole, that the fact that they've put it, whatever they have, we put it in. And I know when we speak Sheng, which is obviously slightly different to Kiswahili and Kikuyu, there's a mixture of something going on. So is there some sort of getting our own back for when people are able to infiltrate the languages? So that's the third question. And then there was one around the question around English being taught in schools, or being the main language taught in schools. And I know, obviously, we're here speaking in English, and I know integration is a big thing even in the UK, and most, you know, the challenges that people have if they're caught, especially by the far right, speaking in another language where they're sat out eating or whatever, the attack is, you're here, speak English. So is there something to be said about the fact that English is so dominant, and therefore to be able to uphold our languages as we spoken, and cultures as well? And do we see that as a form of resistance? And the final question is when we talk about decolonizing, and I know it was really good because you clearly broke it down, it's not decolonizing, especially the anxiety that there is right now, that the institutions and the universities have taken it on, and sometimes actually gaining, not just appropriating it, getting money as a result. Only today we caught wind of the fact that investment, even in Palestine, our universities are doing that. But that's a whole different story. But the fact that everybody's talking about decolonizing now is either watering it down, and so the way you broke it down, you cannot do it in isolation. It's economic, it's political, it's psychological, it's cultural. But then there's a sense that when we talk about decolonizing, we're focused very much on the social ills and material inequality and oppression. So do you find the need to talk about love and joy and food in African literature and arts in general? So those are 5 questions I've just thrown at you. Hopefully you can answer them, in some of them maybe together, and still manage to end. I don't think we'll end at 8 o'clock, but I'll be hopeful. But there you go. Back to you, Mwalimu Ngũgĩ.
Oh my God. First of all, thank you very much for the conversation in general. I've learned a lot, learning a lot, particularly from your mother. What's her African name, your mother's name?
Modoni.
Modoni, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a very beautiful name. Modoni, yeah. Yeah. Let me start with love. Yes, we can talk about love and other things, but there's no reason why if I say I love you, it sounds more lovely than a godet, right? In other words, even wooing your partner, you can woo in an African language. There's nothing that says that you do it in English and so on, But let me say, I want to make it very clear that I'm not saying that English is bad to learn English or French or Portuguese. They are good languages, but so also is Yoruba, so also is Luo, so also is Luganda, so also is Zulu. In other words, there's no language which is more of a language than any other language. Yeah. Let me give you another example, which I normally give. Or rather, let me put it this way. What I totally oppose is hierarchy of languages, that some languages are inherently more of languages than any other. Others, Gujarati is as good a language as English. In other words, is a language like English or like Mandarin, okay? Or like Zulu, like Gikuyu, and so on. So what I really oppose is hierarchy of languages. And colonialism put languages in a hierarchy. European languages are best, the others are lower. Or put this way, you know, a ladder has got rungs. You step, steps. They think of other languages as lower rung or lower steps on the ladder to an English heaven. It's as if in heaven, people speak European languages. No. Let me give you another example with music. Excuse me. Musical instruments is a good example for me. There's piano, okay? There is guitar, there's wadede, there's nyatiti, right? Each instrument has its own sound, okay? And you cannot say the sound of guitar is more soundy, if I might coin a word there, is more sounding than, say, you know, piano, or the piano is higher than violin. Okay, each musical instrument has its own musicality. They can play the same melody, but you can tell that one is piano, that one is guitar, that one is nyatiti or whatever, right? No. In other words, every instrument has its unique musicality. And you don't say, okay, let's destroy all the other instruments and leave only piano, okay? No, you say, no, if they come together, they form an orchestra, you know, they form a kind of harmony, and they produce orchestras and so on. If you arrange them differently, in a different way, they can produce cacophony. Arranged one way, they produce harmony. Another way, cacophony, right? You know. So in the same way, languages, each language has its own unique musicality, whether it's English or Gikuyu or Kiswahili, you know, or Luo. You can feel that music in each language, right? You know, and there's no musicality which more of a musicality than any other. Okay, every language, big or small, has its own musicality, unique sounds, just like anything else. Okay, so to remember that one. Okay, so languages don't have, you don't have to kill one language in order to know another. But you can know that language and add another. That's different. It's like getting the piano and the guitar playing together a melody, but they retain their different sounds, okay? But they can be brought together. In the same way, languages can give to each other if they are made to relate on the basis of equal give and take, okay? Languages, so I'm glad I know English language. I'm glad I can read Shakespeare and other English writers and interpreted for myself. But I also wish I knew Yoruba or Zulu or Russian, okay, or Spanish. They would add to my, yeah. So African, the key thing about languages is we have to avoid the sense of hierarchy. Gikuyu language is not higher than Luo, or Kiswahili is not higher than, but Kiswahili is useful for us to know as Kenyans, as East Africans, as Africans, right? So we have to think different about languages and remove the idea of hierarchy, which produced by colonialism. The sense that some languages are inherently higher than others. No, but languages can relate. They can read through translation, like my book, Kedamo Yuru, is now available in English, and I know it'll be available, I think, either in Turkish or Kurdish. It's being translated to other languages as well right now as we are talking, okay? And it's got origins in Gikuyu. In the same way, we can have, what's her name? Jane Abuchi of Kenya is doing a lot of translation into Ekegusi. She's translated Romeo and Juliet, Shakespeare, into Ekegusi. She has also translated Things Fall Apart into Ekegusi. And she's doing The River Between in Ekegusi. And that's a good thing. You get from other languages, we enrich our languages. What's wrong is when we somehow rather think our languages are not worth, they don't have the sound of educatedness or sound of intelligence, right? But they are good languages, like any other, not better, not worse, just like any other language, okay? Like many other musical instruments, you know? And when we exchange on this equal give and take, we are all equally rich. Like I said, an example, I'm glad that through English, I can read Shakespeare, right? But there's no reason I cannot read Shakespeare through translation into Gikuyu, if it's been available in Gikuyu. I read Russian literature, but not in Russian, in translation, right? Yeah. So, but the key thing I want to leave with all of us, remember that only we who can do something for our languages. Let me talk about, there's someone who talks about revenge, you know, by having Sheng and other, you know, and there's nothing wrong in developing new languages, quite frankly. I think it's a good thing. You have Sheng and we can in fact talk about that. History is very, very interesting. But why should you abandon, say, your mother tongue for Sheng? Why can't you know your mother tongue and Sheng as well, right? Yeah. I know there are some people who think that you can use English in such a way and French, you become subversive by inserting a few African words into English. There's no subversion. You are just enriching English language and its capacity to do many things, right? And there's nothing wrong if that's what you want to do. But it's not a replacement for anchoring ourselves in African languages. And then you can add other languages. You can even invent new languages like Sheng or anything. And there's nothing wrong with that, okay? It's abandonment of one's mother tongue or the language of one's culture. That's what is negative. And that's what's basically colonial, okay? Translation, I don't know, I don't want to mention, translation is, I call translation the language of languages. do you know the best thing for African languages actually was done? You know who did most for African languages? Actually, European missionaries, because they had the Bible translated into so many African languages that even now some of the best Gikuyu is in the Bible, the Gikuyu Bible, for instance. And it's true of other. So translation actually has helped maintain our languages, and that's a good thing. Although they may have had other intentions, that's okay. But the reality is that the translation of the Bible has helped our language preserve our written form of our languages, as it also helped English and German and French. Remember before they were writing only in Latin. Huh? And if I might remind people, the first Englishman to try to translate the Bible from Latin into English, what happened to him? They hanged him afterwards, okay? Yeah, in other words, remember there was a time when they thought English was so crude and rough, and was saying, how can you talk medical terms in English? It had to be Latin and so on. So, anyway, translation is a good thing. And I wish I could see more languages, more translation between African languages themselves, like my story, Gikuyu-language has now been translated into, I think, 100 languages in the world. Gikuyu-language, or the Upright Revolution. You can go to Galada website and you find all the translations there and all the languages there, So translation is really a very good thing. I mean, is there anything else? I think I've really answered nearly all the questions, I think.
Yeah, no, that's good. There's still more that have come in, and somebody's still saying that theirs hasn't been answered, but I really think we can,
okay.
Some of us can stay on maybe for another 10 minutes, but for the people who are leaving, I do want to say thank you so much for being here, participating. I've not been able to follow the whole chat, but I can definitely see some people saying thank you and logging in from everywhere. I would ask if my mom can do like a closing or a summary just for that purpose, and then we'll end with Kivuku's song that was playing there before. I think we had Kamaru's songs as well, but we might end with Kivuku's. But I'm also interested in hearing if there's anything else we want to add. There was somebody who asked, when writing, do you aim at truth or wisdom? And then also a question around decolonizing religion. And this, for me, I smiled because my research is kind of talked about 5 pillars of domination that was used during colonialism, and therefore they still kind of sustain and uphold each other. And religion is one of them. The other one is education, and then it's violence, governance, and economics. So that's a really interesting question, but I don't know whether we can delve totally deep into it. But I did want to at least allow for a comment from each one of you, and maybe end with Ma'am, so that Ma'am can close it. I also want to say to people that yeah, please definitely, if you're interested in hearing more about our work, supporting our work, definitely go into the Racial Justice Network and look through. We've got an event coming up exactly 2 weeks from now on reparations, and it's with and by our patron Esther Stanford Jose, which is mind-blowing. The sessions we've had have also been really good, so I'd encourage anybody, if you're interested in this kind of continuing some of these collective conversations, definitely join us on the 27th. I think it's going to be on the 6th. It might have been put in the chat room as well, but there's also a document that's been added on that has, if people want to stay in touch or be added to our mailing list, because we are producing a lot of content, so they can be added on there too. But I'll just go around now the 3 of you for comment and end with Ma'am. But I know I'm going to stay on for a little bit. And again, Professor Ngugi, thank you so much, because I know what was going on just slightly before, and to be here and to be present and to bring your full self and all this knowledge. I'm really grateful, but if we can stay on a little bit after, it would be great. But over to a comment from you so far. I mean, Gikuyu, you said something as well. Maybe we could start with you, then Professor, and then my mom to close.
Oh, you want me to say something? Oh, hello?
Yeah, the three of you. Yeah, the three of you to say something. I don't know who will start, yourself or Gikuyu can unmute himself. Can somebody unmute Gikuyu?
Oh, is it mute? Oh, am I
Yeah,
mute?
he's fine.
Open. Okay. Oh, yeah. Can you say another poem? Another? Oh, can you read that thing for Wangari? Eh? The son of Wangari. Eh? Do you have the book with you?
You got the book. I've got the book here, but you can't read it from this far.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Unfortunately, I don't have. I unfortunately didn't know Haha.
Right.
I had recorded it earlier.
Yeah.
I had recorded Wangari's poem, but yeah. So you can always revisit it later. But I think my closing is just that what we are learning and what we are talking about today is important, mostly for the generations to come. Because if we drop the ball now, it means that generations to come will be so lost. They will not understand themselves. They will not understand who they are. They will not understand the struggles that are around them. So I'll only finish with saying that if only I knew how to play the guitar, if only I could play the guitar, then I would have done a song for Mekatilili wa Menza, queen from Giriama land, she who was stolen by the colonial terrorists and taken all the way to Gusii land. Queen Mekatilili wa Menza, she who broke out of prison and walked more than 1,000 kilometers back to Giriama land to continue with the liberation of our minds and our people. If only I could play the guitar, I would have done a song for you. If only I could have played the guitar, I would do a song for Modoni Nyanjiro Mama Yetu. She who in 1922 was shot in the heart and her blood flowed down to the ground, mixing with the soil of our land. If only I could play the guitar, I would have done a song for you, Modoni Nyanjiro. If only I knew how to play the guitar, I would have done a song for you, Penny, and you, Ngũgĩ, and you, Professor Kahege, and you, Willie, and you, and you, and you, and Sai, and all of us. If only I knew how to play the guitar, I would have done a song for all of us. Shukran, asante sana.
Yeah, for me, I'd just like to thank you again. Thank you very much, Wangari, for organizing this and for introducing your mother, wonderful mother. That's wonderful. I just wanted to mention just one thing. Kemet, Egyptian civilization. Yeah. There is a group, I think Germany, I think led by Jerry, Rahu Jerry and others, who I think have started Kemet Awards for achievements in African languages. Now, Kemet is very important. It was the language spoken in old Egypt. Egyptian civilization was African in every way, right? And it lasted 3,000 years, longer than even the current Western civilization, which is only 2,000 years, right? Egypt was there for 3,000 years. Medicine, architecture, mathematics, writing systems, all originated in Egypt. The famous Egyptian Greek philosophers we read about or used to go to Egypt for learning, then will come back to Greece, like Pythagoras. He spent some time in Egypt learning, and Egypt was an African civilization. Kemet is the language they spoke there in ancient Kemet. And there are many others, civilizations in Africa, which were African language civilizations. So what we have done in the past, we can do. I want to see African inventors, in African languages. I can see inventors. I like to compete with other nations in getting space crafts, there's no reason why it's not Africa leading journeys to the Mars and other places, I want us to discover, to invent, to make things, and that's why in my epic, Kedamo, I try to show the 9 women or 10 women as makers of things, because they had no brothers to do it for them. So obviously they had to know how to make clothes. They would have to know how to defend themselves. They don't know how to hunt and to organize, because there's no brother to depend upon. Remember that. That's what the story of the Perfect Nine or Kedamoyuru teaches us, women use their mind, their heart, their hand. And that should be our inspiration, what our mothers were able to do, And remember, it's not an accident that among the Gikuyu, every clan among the Gikuyu is named after a woman, not after a man. The only man mentioned in our legend is Gikuyu, the original father, and Mombi. Otherwise, it's all the other. To remember that. We have to find ways of unleashing our imagination, to reach the moon, to Mars, and beyond. We can do it. Why? Because we have done it before in Kemet, right? Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. I was also told to make a comment. And I'll just thank everyone who participated this evening. It is a great evening. And I think, Geduku, you have a lot to do. You are with me on this side of the world, especially in relation to names and our language. You let the youth, I know how influential you are once you decide to make a speech. I saw what you did with the Alliance Girls within a very short time, and you can do it with the young people so that they stop shaming the ones who cannot use the English language in the perfect way.
Rubbing.
Because they twang, they do what, and they make fun of them. They make students from rural area not to talk in class, although they perform very well. Because the minute they say something, everybody is laughing. It is up to you to make them proud of it. I know my students at the university find it funny because the minute I start a new class, I always say, expect a lot of R's everywhere because I'm from Central. So no need to laugh at the back there. And I think I said the ball rolling and it is no longer fun, even if I twang, they don't notice. So Geduku, you have to do a lot of work in that area because I know how effective you are. Then can I also thank Penny? for organizing this. In fact, he has created great opportunities for me instead of the other way around. And I'm happy that he organized this. We've learned a lot. Not to forget that Penny's dad had a surgery yesterday. He's in hospital. And we have still met and done a great thing. And I will say to everybody there, he sent his love and said he's doing well. It's important to mention that because I know this was a sacrifice. Otherwise, I also thank Professor because I've been told you are on something else, but you had to cancel something in order to join us. Otherwise, together, for the rest of the academicians, we have a lot to do. We need to write, we need to campaign, we need to tell people to be proud of their languages and also the history. And unless we reach them in such forums, then they will never know. Like we have done so much today and we thought we knew, only to know that we didn't know, that we didn't know. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I think we'll end on that note. And yeah, I did think about Dad and everything else. I also wanted to mention, we didn't get to talk about this book, and this is also almost becoming a Bible for me, Global Ethics, Theory and the Politics of Knowing. I'm using it a lot. And we didn't talk about what global ethics means and stuff, but maybe for the next one, it might mean that we'll have to arrange to have another conversation with you, Professor, but maybe elongate it even longer than 2 hours, decolonial time. But thank you so much. And thank you for all the comments and everybody who stayed on as well. I hope you found this useful and helpful, and hopefully we can continue doing the work outside and beyond, because I think this is supposed to sensitize us in ways that we don't often see and come across. So thank you. I think we'll put on one of Gikuyu song for now, but yeah, so thank you. Kwaherini, asanteni sana. And I think I also thought through, I should say this before, there is a lot more work being done as well around Afrocentrism. Children, School of Freedom, in Freedom in Nakuru. I know in Rwanda, in Tanzania, there's a lot of work also being done around centering and really acknowledging those histories. So also, I know we're doing a small part by doing this connection, but perhaps people could look around themselves and support those projects, the work that's going out there as well. So asanteni and kwaheri.
Okay.
Let us remember. May we remember the dismembered. Let us remember. Remember not to forget.
It's a journey that we'll never forget.
Yes, I remember, not to forget the great Mekatilili wa Menza.
It's a journey that we'll never forget.
She, the queen from Giriamaland, she who was stolen in 1914, taken from Malindi all the way to Busi. Queen Mekatilili wa Menza, she broke out of prison and walked back more than 800 kilometers to continue with the liberation of our people. It's a journey that I'll never forget. I remember
It's a journey
not to forget.
we'll never forget.
King, remember Koitalel Arap Samoei, Kenyan king.
It's a journey that we'll never forget.
From the Nandi Hills, he resisted against the colonial invasion.
It's a journey that we'll never forget.
Koitalel Arap Samoei, they shot him right in the heart.
It's a journey that we'll never forget.
Remember the great Wayakiwahinga, him who was a king from Nairobi,
It's a
him who brought forth the great
never forget.
Wamboi wa Otieno, King Wayakiwahinga. I'll never forget.
Journey that we'll never forget.
He was buried alive in Voi, alive.
journey that we'll never forget.
Yes, I choose not to forget the great General Mungi, the first political assassination in Kenya. I choose not to forget the great general. Let us remember to remember. May we remember not to forget. Let us remember to remember the great Pio Gamapinto, him who fought in 2 countries, in Goa, India, and in Kenya. The great Pio Gamapinto, first member of parliament to be assassinated in independent Kenya. I will never forget, never forget, never forget.
It's a journey that we'll never
I
forget.
choose to remember not to forget. Yeah.
It's a journey that we'll never forget.
Gamapinto, your light shines on. We move on. May we remember not to forget. Remember not to forget.
It's a journey that we'll never forget.
How can I forget not to remember the great Bildad Kagia, the most principled Kenyan revolutionary leader? Him
Never forget.
Him who sacrificed all worldly possessions to save this great nation. I will never forget. Bildad Kagia.
It's a journey that we'll never forget.
Remember to remember. Remember not to forget.
It's a journey that we'll never forget.
I choose to remember the great Mzee Moroa Galana from Okomoland, him who donated
That we'll never forget.
the melody that we sing upon the national anthem, Mzee Moroa Galana. I choose not to forget. Justice be our shield and defender.
It's a journey that we'll never forget.
Alitupwa kama kinachotupwa, lakini I choose not to forget. Let us remember not to forget. I choose to remember the professors of the people, Professor Ngugi wa Thiongo, Professor Oyugi Okongo, Professor Maina wa Kenyate, Professor Katama Mukangi, Professor Wangare Maathai, she of the Order of the Rising Sun.
It's a journey that we'll never forget.
May we remember not to forget the great Mwakenya legends.
It's a journey that we'll never forget.
Put in waterlogged Nyayo House dungeons.
It's a journey that we'll never forget.
Tortured, made to suffer for Kenya to recover.
It's a journey that we'll never forget.
Yes, I remember Adongo Ogonye, him who brought forth the great Karemi Nduku again. Wahome whispers Mutahi, Josephine Mulili, Akauka,